Greetings to everybody. I'm glad to see everybody here, all of those who made it. I'm sure we'll get plenty more as time goes on. However, I would like everybody here who is here right now to stand up right now. We're going to say a quick prayer, and that will be followed up by worship, and then we'll have our guest speaker come out and speak. So we're in for a great day today.
shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, no lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Love me, overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99, and I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you gave yourself away. Love me, overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of Lord, I come, I confess, bowing here, I find my rest. Without you, I fall apart. You're the one that guides my heart. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. And when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. And when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. You're my one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine, heir of salvation, purchase of God, born of His Spirit, washed in His blood. Perfect submission, all is at rest. I in my Savior am happy and blessed, watching and waiting, looking above, filled with His goodness, lost in His blood. This is my story. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day
thank you for letting us come here today, Jesus. Thank you for letting us come here safely, Jesus, for bringing us all together, Lord. Thank you for being here before we were even here, Lord God. Jesus, I ask that you bless the service, Father. I ask that you come and plant seeds wherever you see the need to, Lord. I ask that you grow those seeds, Father, whoever needs them today, Lord. Jesus, bless the speaker that's going to be here, Lord God, that's going to be teaching us your word, Lord. Thank you for everything you've already done for us today, Jesus. And I ask that you just bless the rest of the service, the rest of the worship, the rest of the time we have, the fellowship, that we meet new people, Lord, and that we get along, Jesus, and that everything is for your will and everything is for your glory, Lord. Thank you for everything, Lord. Bless the rest of the service. And everybody said, amen.
How about now? Oh. It's all of a sudden really loud. All right, how's everyone doing today? You guys doing well? Was it kind of weird, like the weather-wise coming here? It's like sunny, and then it rained a little, and then it snowed last night, but it was in the 40s, and it's fascinating. Yeah, it's Oregon. It's Oregon. So, how many of you are from Oregon? From this area? Anybody live elsewhere before they moved here? Okay, whereabouts? Russia? Belarus? So I'm from San Diego, California, originally. So moving up here was like, oh, it's cold and rainy a lot. It's okay though, I really, really enjoyed it. So I'm here today to talk to you about something really cool. Do you guys know what I'm here to talk to you about? your brain. Point to where your brain is. Okay, most of you know. Some of you are staring at me like, I'm not going to talk to you yet. All right, it's okay. So tell me what you know about the brain. Tell me what you know so far. It's pink. Okay? It doesn't have pain sensors. That's good. What else do you know about the brain? It's not fully developed until you're 25. That's going to be a huge point of what we're talking about today. Because how many of you are not 25 years old yet? Exactly. How many of you are over 25? You guys are on the perimeter, like on the outskirts. Like, we're just going to... Yeah, okay. Cool. All right, so my video is up. It looks like we are good to go. So my name is, I'm Dr. Jesse Payne. And let's just start right there. That is a terrible last name to have, Dr. Payne. Just get the jokes out now. I have heard it all. So don't try to be clever. I promise you I've heard everything. When I was an elementary school teacher, I was Mr. Payne. I might just yell. Oh, I'm back. Okay. The teacher next to me was Miss Hurt. So we were Miss Hurt and Mr. Payne teaching second and third grade in this small little Christian school in Southern California. So we're like the dark wing of the school. And all right, so here's a little bit about me. So I'm a professor over at Corby University, and I'm a professor in the teacher education department. So I'm essentially a teacher who teaches future teachers how to teach. That's what I do. And I love it. I've loved being in education. Like I said, I was an elementary school teacher for a number of years. I was a high school teacher, and now I teach college. Notice how I avoided middle school, because... Is anybody in middle school here? I'm really sorry. Like, anybody in high school? Do you remember your middle school years? Uh-huh. A lot of us block it out for a reason. So that's kind of like half of my life. Half of my life is teacher education, working with teachers. I still sub in the Salem-Keizer School District at least once a month, and I'm a substitute teacher in the elementary school classes just to keep myself fresh in my teaching so I don't get too old. And I love it. It's a lot of fun. So that's half of what I do. The other half of what I do is I research, study, write, publish about, and teach about the human brain. Now, how did I get involved with that? It's a good story. So I am 21 years old, working at IKEA in San Diego. Anybody know IKEA? Woo! All right, yeah. Great bookshelves. The beds, not so much. They're not that great. So I'm working at IKEA, and I meet a girl. And we start dating, and we are going to, we're dating now for like 6 months. And then 6 months into it, she's like, oh, hey, so my dad wants to meet you. And I'm like, oh, okay. Whew, here we go. Gonna meet her dad, right? It's a scary thing, 21 years old. Yeah, he's driving down from Orange County, which is about an hour away, and he wants to have dinner next week. Okay, so the next week, he comes down, and we go to dinner. He sits down, and he looks at me, and he goes, how long have you been dating my daughter? It's like, it's been about 6 months now. Yeah, I want to scan your brain. Who just said that? Somebody just said, what? My reaction exactly. I was like, And I look at Bree, who's now my wife. I'm like, what? And she just goes oh no. And I was like, what? And he goes, yeah, no. I have a policy that if you date one of my daughters for more than 6 months, I have to scan your brain. So now I'm scared. Now I'm okay, this isn't funny anymore. What? Turns out she never told me this in the 6 months that we had been boyfriend and girlfriend, but he is this world famous doctor who's written 45 books, 7 New York Times bestsellers, all related to the brain and how it relates to human behavior. That's what he does. So the next week, I drive up to Orange County and I have my brain scanned. And he sits me down and he's looking at this picture of my brain and he goes, huh. And I'm like, oh. I failed. And he goes, and I'm like, huh, that doesn't sound good. And he goes, well, I can tell just by looking at how your brain works that you kind of have like this tendency to be stubborn and oppositional and kind of argumentative. So what do you think the worst response to that is? No, I'm not. And do you know what I did? Crossing my arms, no, I'm not. To then now, Bree, my wife now, it goes, oh, again. That moment, though, see, that moment was awesome because that was like one of those life-defining, changing moments. Because that was the first time in my life I had ever been aware that your brain, like this 3-pound supercomputer that God created, this brain is actually like related to how you act or how you behave. Like before that day, I just thought of my brain like, oh yeah, it's just a brain. You know, like, okay, like I remember taking biology in high school. It's like dendrites, neurons, the end. Now to me, this was really important though, because my mom struggled with mental illness. My mom has schizophrenia. My first memory in life, I was 4 years old, and my mom had kidnapped me and taken me on a high-speed police chase through Fresno, California. That's my first memory, is sitting in a car surrounded by police officers, helicopters. Oh, they had cut us off at a bridge, and this female officer comes to my side of the window, and other officers were distracting my mom, and this female officer looks at me, he's like, hey, I'm 4, I'm like, hey, I'm scared, and she's like, she pulls out a lollipop, and she's like, you want the lollipop? I'm 4. Yes, I want the lollipop. So she's like, unlock the door. I'll give you the lollipop. So I sold out my mother for a lollipop. That's my first memory. So you can see how all of a sudden, flash forward to 21 years old, being told and seeing how your brain works is involved in how you work changed my life. Because then I was like, okay, I want to learn more. I want to help people with this. How do I get involved? So I started working there. And then I started doing clinical intakes and clinical interviews. And I would like interview patients as they came in to get their brain scans and have treatments. 2-hour interviews, and I got so involved with this, and it helped me do what I love to do best. So I take this world and my teaching world, and now I bring it together. And now one of the coolest things that I love to do is to teach about the brain. And one of my favorite things to do is to teach it to groups like this right here, where it's 15 to 25 years old. That's like, I've said that back and back. In fact, I think I just talked to, is it Ruben? Is he here? There he is, Ruben. I was like, hey, what's the age range? He's like 15 to 25. I'm like, yes, that's perfect, because this is like prime brain developing years right now. Who's over 25? Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just kidding. We'll still talk about it. All right. So I start off with this little image right here. Tell me what book this is from. It's Dr. Seuss. Yes, that's the author. What's the book called? Oh, the Places You'll Go. Has anybody read this book? Yeah. Anybody had this like read by their parents? What about like teacher at the end of the school year? A lot of us have, right? It's this idea of, oh, look at, you're going to go off in the world and do great things. In fact, that's how the book starts. Congratulations! Today is your day. You're off to great places. You're off and away. You have brains in your head. You have feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself any directions you choose. All together now. Aww. That was a little dramatic. Notice how I was like, I said aww, and it went like aww. Okay. We'll talk about drama in just a little bit, by the way. But this idea right here is fascinating. This idea that you can steer yourself any direction you choose. Like, how many of you have been told this? How many of you have heard this before? You can do whatever you want in life. All you have to do is what? Work hard. Believe in yourself. What else? Never give up. Pray, pray. Like, you can do it. You can do whatever you want. Now, how many of you have ever seen another person who clearly cannot steer themselves any directions they choose? Anybody see that person? Anyone know that person? Is anyone that person? Parents in here, raise your hands. Tell me how many times you have seen young people operate in ways where they're clearly not steering themselves the directions they choose. Do you see that happen? You do. And yet we don't stop to really look and analyze that. So here I am. I'm working at an elementary school in San Diego doing non-directive play therapy, where I literally would have kids who were considered at risk, like they were on the verge of not doing well in school, come with me into my classroom, and we did play therapy, and it was awesome. That was my first job in schools. It was great. And I'm doing that half-time, and then I'm learning about the brain. And then I start realizing, I get stuck right here. This idea that you can steer yourself any direction you choose. In fact, I would read this book to my students at the end of our program. And sometimes I'm looking at the students and seeing how they're struggling and thinking of the brain and thinking of how the brain gets hurt. When we talk about that in church communities, it's like sin and the effects of sin on our lives, the effects of sin in our brain, on our brain, whether it's our choices or choices by other people that hurt us. And so I start to get challenged by this, and I start asking a question, which is not you can steer yourself in any direction you choose, but what if you can't? This is hard for me. I have a mom with schizophrenia. My mom doesn't get to steer herself wherever she wants. When she's stressed, she starts hallucinating. When she's super stressed, she falls apart. So I start really struggling here, which got me even more excited about working with the brain. So today, this right here, by the way, is an actual picture of a real person's brain scan. Now, your brain's not rainbow colored. I saw some of you get really excited right now. Oh, no. That is your brain. That's what the computer does to look at areas that might be underactive or that might be hurt. Your brain is very pink. Somebody said over here, very soft, very wrinkly. But what you see right here, this is a form of imaging called SPECT imaging, which all of that means is it's how your brain's actually working, the blood flow across the brain. So this is a real person's brain. Now, that brain looks beautiful. That is a nice-looking brain. In fact, give it a hand right there. Come on, give it a hand. That's a good brain. Thank you. No, that's not my brain. I wish. But we're going to talk about how the brain develops today, and we're going to talk about why it's so important to take care of God's most magical creation. So my hope today, in just this short amount of time I'm here today, is that you walk out of here not brain experts, but walk out of here and think about your brain a little bit more than you probably did before you came here. To respect it, to treat it right. Are you with me? Yes. Are you sure? Yes. Okay. I'm always looking to see. I like it. Oh. That was my sign for let's begin. Okay. So we're going to start with 8 brain facts. You may have heard some of these before. In fact, one person already said one of these facts. So here goes. Number 1 is this. You are your brain. Say it with me. You are your brain. It's a little monotone. You were kind of half bored. Let's try it again. You are your brain. Okay, there's drama right here. Overemphasis again. You are your brain. So what does that mean? This idea that you are your brain. What does that mean? What do you think? I'm a teacher. I can wait. I can just keep waiting. Go ahead. I caught the beginning. I heard tissue. Okay. All right. You are your brain. your brain tissue, how it works, how it operates, is how you operate. So I'm going to give you a list. This is just a small list of things that your brain is involved with. Your dreams. Like, how many of you remembered what you dreamt last night? So you want to hear something great? My dream last night was that the PowerPoint couldn't work on my computer for this. And I woke up, like, panicking. And I made sure I had all the connections. So it was like literally living the dream right now before. It's like, and it's not going to work. It's not going to work. So those of you, we'll talk about a little bit more. Like, I have an anxious brain. My brain is wired anxiously. That's just part of my genetic makeup. It's part of because of a lot of trauma in childhood. I'm an anxious person. So when I have dreams, it's usually anxious dreams about things that I'm anxious about. Okay? So your dreams. How many of you don't remember any of your dreams at all? None. Okay, we should talk because that's not good. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. It's totally fine. Your thoughts. Your thoughts come from and originate in your brain. Your happy thoughts, your sad thoughts, your fearful thoughts, your angry thoughts, your impulsive thoughts, your bodily functions, your health, your memories. How many of you have really good memory? Yeah. How many of you don't even remember getting here today? Uh-huh. How many of you don't have memory until you have coffee in the morning? Anyone in here in that situation? Okay. Your personality. Your problem solving. Like, we all have problems that come into our life. How your brain works kind of helps to determine how you react to problems. Some of you, it's like a problem comes and you're like, oh, we got a problem. All right, let's calm down. Let's think this through. How many of you say you're that? Not very many, okay. Some of you, like a problem comes and you're just like, oh, there's a problem. Bring it. We're going to do this. Anybody that person? Some of you are like, there's a problem. Anybody that person? Middle schoolers? Where are my middle schoolers? Your decisions, your actions, your reactions, your interactions, your relationships, your failures, even your heartbeat. I was once giving this presentation to first graders. So congratulations, you guys are learning exactly what 6-year-olds learn so far. Set the bar high, really high. Anyways, as I was talking to 6-year-olds about this, one of them interrupted me. He was like, you're wrong. Really? Anybody know 6-year-olds? Yeah, they lack something. What do they lack? Forethought? Impulse control? Hi, you're 6. So I'll tell you what, if you ever want to know the truth about anything, he will give you the truth. Yes. Are you mom? Yeah, she's like, Yeah. All right. So here we go. I was talking to, and one kid interrupts, and he's like, you're wrong. I'm like, I'm wrong? Tell me how I'm wrong. Your heart is so much more important than your brain. I was like, really? Well, tell me how you know that. Duh. Blood. It's like, touche. All right. Like, your blood pumps, or your heart pumps the blood into your brain. It wouldn't survive without your heart. I was like, but guess what tells your heart how to pump, how fast to pump, when to slow down, and how to work? And he was like, oh, see, like, there you go. Just modeled perfect first grade behavior. My brain! And I was like, yes, which is so cool. Like, I love teaching elementary school because you get these like light bulb moments, right? It's like, yeah, awesome. Now I teach college and I'm like, hey guys, boom, and I get this. High schoolers, you're all the same too. It's right. All right. So that's just why I try to articulate that really well, because we don't really stop to truly think that everything you're doing right now, every single part of you, is because and correlated and tied with how this 3-pound supercomputer floating in water, housed in your skull, how that's operating. Like, go like this with your hand. This is about the size of your heart. Go like this with your hands. This is about the size of your brain. Stop comparing. Always. Always. I always see this like, oh, here's my brain. Or I see this like, no. Here's why that doesn't really matter with the size. Because brain fact number 2, say it with me, your brain is, okay, that was terrible. Say it with me, your brain, oh, there's nothing there. I love that the high schoolers with attitude. Say it with me, your brain is ridiculously complex. So here's the thing about that. Like, you guys can understand that your brain's complicated. But the point here is, your brain's not just complicated, it's ridiculously complicated. So you're going to say it again with me, but you're going to overemphasize. I'm going to give the drama people, say it. Give that ridiculously some oomph. Ready? Your brain is ridiculously complex. Here is why that's important to know. When you stop and consider the human brain, what you recognize is that this is God's creation. And God created your brain, which is the most complex organ in the known universe. Aside from our Creator, obviously, there is nothing that we know of that is more complex than that supercomputer running the show inside your head right now. Your brain has 100 billion neurons. And these neurons can have trillions of supporting cells. And these cells can have as many as 40,000 connections between them. So who's good at math in here? Somebody say you? No, I'm an elementary teacher. I'm good at addition. Who's good at math? Come on, somebody be brave. All right, back corner. Here we go. 40,000 times 3 trillion times 100 billion. Go. A lot. Here's what the answer to that is. There are more connections in your brain than there are stars in the entire Milky Way galaxy. I mean, could I get a ooh? It's pretty good. Elementary teacher, just stay with me. So let's give some perspective to that right now. Like, imagine last night in Salem, you're looking up in the night sky. What do you see? Okay, yes, that's true. You see this. Let's imagine you were like in Bend or somewhere where it's not raining all the time. You look into the night sky and you see just like the amazing sky filled with stars. Here's what's really fascinating about that, is that this, you see this little red writing right here? It says interstellar neighborhood. There's a little disk. This little disk right here is all we can see from the Earth in the sky. So when I say that there are more connections in your brain than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy, that's the incredible complexity of the human brain. So that's why we say your brain is not just complex, it is love the enthusiasm. That was really good. Okay. Here, thank you. I need that right now. All right. So your brain is complex. It's 2% of your body's weight, but it uses almost a third of the calories that you consume. Your brain holds 2.4 petabytes of information. It's like I think it's a billion bytes or something insanely crazy. Or basically, your brain can hold the capacity of, if you took 10,000 pictures or digital thoughts, excuse me, sorry, I misspelled that one already. It's the second time, and now I'm going to really obsess over them. Imagine if you took 10,000 photos every day for your entire life. That's about how much your brain can hold. Now, if I were to go and take a piece of your brain tissue the size of a single grain of sand, so I want you to think of how small a single grain of sand is. If I were to take a piece of brain tissue the size of a single grain of sand, it would have 100,000 neurons and over 1 billion connections, all talking to each other. Can I hear a ah? Because we did the ooh, now you have to say ah, right? All right, males in here, where are you at? You have 10% more neurons than females do. Here we go, ready? Slow clap, right? It's looking like the audience is a little outnumbered in gender. All right, there's always a however. Females have more connections in their brain typically than males do. Especially, females actually have been shown to have larger connections that connect the hemispheres together and larger access to the emotional centers of the brain, which is really cool. Like in connections and bonding. Information travels up to 268 miles per hour in the human brain. So your brain is complex, it is incredibly fast and efficient. What was number one? What was number two? Yeah, I didn't think I was going to do that. I see several of you like, I didn't know we were going to be quizzed. Number three is this: your brain is not fully developed until you're about 25, or up to 28 for males. And if you were diagnosed with ADHD, it could be 7 years after that. Why is it faster for girls? I don't know. They do things quicker. They usually get taller faster at first, and then boys catch up. They can be more mature sometimes. Oh, thank you. He knows firsthand. He's like, mm-hmm. Here's what this means, though, because, when you consider this idea that your brain isn't fully developed until you're 25, what is the legal age of adulthood? 18. 18, you're a legal adult. Tell me, let's stop. Parents, where are you at again? Tell me when we ever look at 18-year-olds. How many of you even know 18-year-olds in here? How many of you are 18? Tell me when you ever look at an 18-year-old and you're like, yes, that is a fully functional human being right here. Anyone? No. Usually you're looking at 18-year-olds and you're like, oh. You do the face palm, right? Oh. Parents, you look back at yourself at 18 and oftentimes you go, oh, not good. But here's what's fascinating about that. It's we have this idea that your brain's fully developed, and it's not. Even if you're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, you better be sure that you're seeking the guidance of fully functional brains in your life. When your parents are telling you, hey, no, yes, don't do this, it's because they're using fully developed brains that are able to see the future, that actually think about consequences, where the teenage brain's like, consequences? What? What does that mean? It's wired that way. So we have to be aware of that. This also means that brain injuries, drugs, alcohol, poor nutrition, they're a disaster for brain development. If you hurt your brain young, then what you've done is you've changed the trajectory of your brain's development for the rest of your life. So it is even more important right now that you are taking care of this brain that is still developing. Do not injure it. Don't do things to hurt it. Alongside with that is point number 4, which is this: your brain is quite fragile. How many of you have ever seen a brain in a museum, like OMSI or something, where it's on exhibit? It's gray and rubbery and firm. That's not a living brain. That's a deceased brain that's been soaked in formaldehyde. The living brain is soft, incredibly soft, in a really hard skull. Your brain is about as soft as warm butter, tofu, custard, somewhere between an egg white and Jell-O. So think about that. God's most precious creation, the human brain, responsible and involved in every part of your life, as soft as Jell-O. Go like this right now, right with me. Put your hands out. Look right at me. It's very scientific. And do this. Come on, do it. When you're doing that, your brain's jiggling up there,
inside your skull. Excuse being graphic, but if I were to take off your skull and put my hand onto your brain, I could just go completely through it and just like mashed potatoes. I'm sorry, but I have to illustrate to you for a reason. Think of that. This is how soft your brain is inside your skull right now. Just floating around in there. And guess what? Your skull, okay, no more. Too much. Brain injuries matter. So look at this example right here. This is a picture or a model of a human skull. This right here is an actual skull. Do you see those ridges right there? These like ridges that go right here? Some of those ridges can be as sharp as knives in some people's skulls. That's kind of scary. This precious brain, soft as warm butter, floating in there, responsible for everything. What it means is we have to protect it. Brain injuries matter. Does anybody know who this is? His name is Phineas Gage. This is a story of a railroad worker in the 1800s. His job was to blow up mountains for the railroad company to lay track. Using this 3-foot metal rod with the pointy end on it as a tool device to dig through the mountains. One of those days, though, as he's digging the hole to put the dynamite, that rod slips in. And it goes, sparks the bottom, and then creates an explosion, which sends that rod straight up. And it injures him. I'm looking at the age of the audience. I'm going to skip the next slide. Well, it's not that bad. It's a computer drawing, but here's what happens in it. So this pole, it actually went through the brain and came out. Now, what would you expect to happen if you had an injury like that? Probably die? Be in a coma? Lose consciousness? He didn't do any of that. When it happened, all his coworkers were like, ah! And he was like, did you guys see that? And they're like, ah! And they put him in a wheelbarrow and they took him to the hospital. 1800s, okay. I'm going to go put him in a Nissan Leaf where he's declared a medical miracle. He's declared like, wow, this guy's amazing. Except he was hurt. He didn't lose consciousness, no. But do you think he was the same person after that accident? He wasn't. He was hurt. And he ended up becoming really violent and really aggressive. And he got fired from jobs. And he couldn't keep a job anymore, so he joined the circus in San Francisco to talk about his story. Now here's why I say that story, because a lot of us have this idea that in order to have a really bad brain injury, you have to have like lost consciousness or like been knocked out. That's wrong. Like how many of you have had a concussion before? Raise your hand. Do you know what a concussion is? It's hurting the brain. So if you've had a concussion, it's okay, because what's awesome is that God made a brain that's actually resilient. You know, if your brain never healed and didn't get better, then we'd all be done. Because we all do terrible things sometimes for our brain. So you're like, our Father created this magical brain that heals itself. But it doesn't mean we're like, oh, I just do whatever I want. It's going to heal itself. No, not really. It does. It gets better. But if you hurt it, it might not ever get to where it could have been. And it's our duty. We talk about like honoring our bodies. Let's extend that and say, let's honor our brain. The brain that we get one of in this life that God made for us. So tell me, how do people hurt the brain? Yes. How else? Tell me what the most common way that teenagers hurt the brain. So we'll do some science first, because I'm hearing the answers. Does anybody know Newton's first law of motion? An object in motion stays in motion unless acted upon by a force. That was pretty good. A lot of you got that. Kind of got the same look as before, though. Some of you were like, oops. So here's your brain. Like, has anybody had a whiplash before or got into a car accident? Let's explain the process of that. You're in a car, you're driving 40 miles an hour. Guess what? Your brain is also traveling 40 miles an hour with you. And then you hit something. Your body was still traveling 40 miles per hour and keeps going forward, but is caught by what? Your seatbelt. But your brain is still traveling 40 miles per hour and does what? Slams against the skull. And oftentimes, then bounces and then hits the back, creating 2 injuries in one. The number one way that young people hurt the brain is through sports. Okay, you were with me? No, I'm not sure. We should not be applauding. Can you tell me which sports you think are dangerous for the brain? Football. Let's talk about soccer. Does soccer hurt the brain? Yeah. Especially if you do headers. Think about what you do in a header. You're taking a hit onto your brain from a ball. That's what you're doing. You're like, oh, here comes this ball that can be traveling up to 75 miles per hour. And here it is. Oh, here's coming. Full field. Here it comes. You know, I'm going to use my head that protects my brain, that's responsible for everything, and is the most amazing, complex organ in the known universe, that's responsible. Here, let me aim it. Boom. No. Do you know that soccer is the number one source of concussions for female athletes and has been correlated with lower IQ, lower retention rates, and lower college acceptance and graduation rates? I'm hearing a lot of like, oh God. I know. And if you have concussions playing soccer when you're younger, it's dangerous. There's a reason why we should be really careful. Like, you shouldn't see this. I mean, right there's 2 injuries in one. Soccer can be dangerous. Let me show you a picture of soccer headers. Do you remember how that first brain looked? How does this one look? What do you see? It looks like holes right here, right there, right there. Oh, look, all the places that headers are typically done. Now, where you see a hole in these images is not an actual hole in the brain, but it means that that part of the brain is actually underactive or it's hurt. This was a 17-year-old soccer player who was in my office when I worked for the Amen Clinics. So he came in, he's sitting down with his mom, who was a nurse. Now, how do I know she's a nurse? Because she told me about 4,000 times in 2 hours that she was a nurse. Like, she walked in like, hi, I'm a nurse. Okay, thank you, nurse. Nice to meet you. Yeah, so we're here today because I'm a nurse, and I know that my son is using drugs. How do I know? Because I'm a nurse. And so the son is sitting down, and he's just like this. Mom, stop. Mom, I'm not using drugs, Mom. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. I know you're using drugs because I'm a nurse, and I know all of the symptoms and everything that happens, and for the last 4 years, I've noticed you're declining in your academics, you're isolating yourself from your peers more, you are not the same kid that you were 4 years ago before you started using drugs. And he's just like, Mom, you've drug tested me 3 times this year. And I've passed them. And she's like, I don't know how you're cheating it, but I'm a nurse, and I know that you're using it, and we're going to get a brain scan to prove it. And now I'm here going like, okay, you both need brain scans. Like, chill out, Mom. Like, what is this? So I start asking questions like, so have you had any traumatic brain injuries? No. Have you had any brain injuries? No. Have you had any concussions? Well, yeah, like 3 or 4, but it's not a big deal. 3 or 4. Yeah, that's a big deal. When was your first concussion? Guess what he said? 4 years ago. And now Mom was like, she didn't think about that. So I was like, so tell me what happened 4 years ago. He's like, well, we were playing soccer, and the coach decided to practice headers for 45 minutes straight. 45 minutes of full field headers straight, like 45 minutes. 45 minutes of brain damage. So he goes home, and he's lethargic, and he's throwing up, and mom is like, oh my gosh, this looks like all the symptoms of a traumatic brain injury. How would she know this, by the way? She's a nurse. So she takes him to the ER where half the soccer team was already there. This coach caused brain injuries in the entire team, and actually statistics show that only half of concussions are ever reported. This was about 10 years ago. Could you imagine if that happened today? People ask, what happened to him? I don't know. We just did the interview and we're done. So the point is here is like, your brain is more important than a soccer goal. It really is. And to be like, well, no, I had that little guard, and it's this little band. And like, well, great. That protects your forehead from a bruise. But you cannot argue physics. It's not protecting your brain. In fact, even helmets don't protect the brain. What do they protect? Your skull. Another sport that can be very dangerous. Baseball. That picture is a test of empathy. Empathy is actually a prefrontal cortex function. People with really good prefrontal cortex look at this picture and they go, the baby. Like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. Usually people with underactive prefrontal cortex are like, the inability to think like that poor child that just face planted. So let me tell you a story. At Corbin University, I actually had a female softball player who got hit in the side of the head with a softball pitch, with the helmet on. She was knocked out for 90 minutes, and she lost the ability to read and write for 6 weeks. What about football? You all screamed it, so you know it's true. Like, we know, we have overwhelming evidence to show that football causes brain injuries. Adults in here, you guys know how recent this is. 10 years ago, people were still arguing that football did not hurt the brain. Well, now we know it does. And we see evidence of this all the time. Why we would put a small child's brain into a helmet and slam it against anything is beyond me. Now, I have an 8-year-old son, and he's great. And I put him in soccer when he was like 5 years old. And people are like, you hypocrite! I'm like, they don't have headers at 5. It's a great sport. I'm 3/4 Hispanic, by the way. I'm 3/4 Mexican. I know I don't look it. And Payne does not sound. That's the 25%. But like, soccer is like, that's part of like my family's tradition, and it was a big deal. So for my son, I was like, it's a great team sport. This was great. Now, he has anxiety, like me. So he played like 1 season, and he had the ball, and someone took it away, and then he cried. It was like, why are we sharing it? And I'm like, okay, not the sport for you. He does track and field now, which he loves, and there's not brain injuries in track and field. We'll talk later. All right. I always get one too. All right. But let me show you a brain scan of a football player. Do you see something wrong there? Yeah, as in there shouldn't be the Grand Canyon in your prefrontal cortex. So when I was teaching at an elementary school in Chula Vista, California, right by the U.S.-Mexico border, the Chargers, the San Diego Chargers back then, which I still will never say the Los Angeles Chargers, by the way, but the San Diego Chargers were there at the school for Dr. Seuss's birthday, like Read Across America. So I am super excited, like, yes, here we go. And I go into this first grade classroom, and like my NFL hero is like there trying to sit in a first grade chair, which is hilarious because they're like really small. But he's reading a Dr. Seuss book to first grade class, and he can't read it. He's mumbling, he's stuttering, he is struggling reading the book. There's news cameras in the back, there's reporters, there's teachers, and like the whole class is there, and everybody's like, oh, like this is awkward. And it gets really silent. And then in the front row, literally right in front of him, is like that kid. Like the kid with ADD. So it's not just like impulse control, but then it's like really bad impulse control. So he's sitting there and he's like this. And I'm like, and I know this kid. I'm like, oh God, he's going to blurt something. He's going to blurt something. And even the teacher, his teacher was like, and she like goes behind the football player and is like, don't do it. Finally, he can't help himself. And in the middle, as he's trying to read, he's just like, what's wrong with you? Why can't you read? Even I can read that book. Everybody in the whole room was like, oh! And he looks at him and he goes, you know what? You are absolutely right. When I was your age, reading Dr. Seuss books was my favorite thing to do. And now I have hit my brain so many times, I can't even read to my own kids. Everybody was just like, oh. And then his response was like, well, then don't hit your head. Okay, well. How about another sport? Basketball. Do we see head injuries in basketball? Yeah, we do. I think that's still basketball. But let me tell you a story. I actually had a basketball player at Corbin University. He dropped out of school. He had received 12 concussions in 6 years playing basketball. He was this short. He was fast, but he was at every single other player's elbow height. And the week before he dropped out, his roommate came into my office like, dude, something is wrong. This morning, he was trying to plug the Xbox controller into the microwave. See, like that right there is like evidence of significant cognitive decline. That's scary. And he had to drop out because he couldn't do it anymore. So what do you think the worst sport is for the human brain? Did you hear cheerleading? Is that you? Yeah. No. Boxing. Think about this. Think about boxing. You're literally using God's most precious creation as a punching bag. That's what you're doing. God's most magnificent creation, responsible for every part of you, and you're just like, let me beat it up repeatedly with a glove. Anybody know who Muhammad Ali is? I met him in person because he had his brain scanned at our clinic, and his brain looked like Swiss cheese. It was that beat up, and he saw it and he cried. And he said, I always wonder what my life would be like now had I never boxed. Because you see him in his heyday, wow, he was so great. He struggled significantly in just basic life functioning later in life. Does anybody know Mike Tyson? All right. So this is a quote from Mike Tyson. I try to catch them right onto the tip of his nose because I try to punch the bone into the brain. Which to me is attempted murder. Like, you're trying to punch the bone into the brain. That's not good. And anybody know who Mike Tyson is? Like, tell me when in history someone looks at Mike Tyson and you're like, oh yeah, fully functional human being right there. No, because if you're trying to eat your opponent's ear, not if you're trying, if you do, twice in one match, something is terribly wrong. So your brain is fragile. Protect it. Your brain is more important than a goal, than a touchdown. And some people say, like, well, what about like rugby? That's got to be more dangerous. Actually, people suffer less concussions in rugby than they do in the NFL. Do you know why? They don't have helmets and protection. So they're not, like, NFL players are like, oh, I've got helmets on. You don't see rugby players like, hey, I'm going to tackle you with my head first. They're a little bit careful. Number 5 is this. When your brain works right, guess what? You're working right. If your brain is functioning the way God intended your brain to function, you're probably doing pretty good. Problem is, we do a lot of bad things. Or accidents happen. So we have to stop and think, when our brain's not working right, we might be having some trouble in our lives. So if you look at this brain on the left, once again, round of applause, come on. That is an 80-year-old woman's brain. One of the coolest, best-looking brains we had ever seen. And at the clinics that I worked at, they had over 135,000 brain scans from people all over the world. 80-year-old woman. Amazing. Do you know why her brain looked this good? She took care of it. At the age of 80, she was still active. She was still involved. She played golf and tennis at 80. And I played her tennis, and she whooped me. At the age of 80, she was still active in her community. She didn't just go to church, she served on the board of her church. She was involved in her church. At the age of 80, she still took one community college class every single semester since she was 18. Is that not amazing? And can you imagine being 80 years old and being in a class with like an 18-year-old? And sometimes the 18-year-olds would say to her, like, dude, lady, like, why are you here? You're like gonna die soon. Like, they tell her that. And her response was, God's given me one brain in this one life. And I will honor it, and I will keep learning until the day I die. That to me is awesome. That to me is honoring God's most amazing creation. It is. Anybody like adults in here, think of like sometimes we see people like retire and then their health declines rapidly within just a couple of years. Your brain was not created to just rot, to just sit in retirement. Even though she had retired, she still stayed active. So for all of you young people in here, like, guess what? You don't have a choice. You're in school. You have to learn. Whether it's homeschool, public school, private school, it doesn't matter. Like, somebody's telling you got to learn. Be appreciative of that, because if you weren't learning, your brain starts deteriorating. If you're not learning, it starts unraveling. So when you stop going to school, keep learning new things. Look at this brain on the right. Forgive the dramatics. Although this section would like them a lot, right? That's a brain scan of an 18-year-old. 80 on the left, 18 on the right. What's the difference? Person on the left took care of her brain. Person on the right used meth, did drugs. You want to know the reason why you don't do drugs? They destroy the brain. When you have a healthy brain, you see people who are healthy, happy, effective, consistent, successful. People are usually like, well, like, what's the example of like the perfect brain? Well, we only got one example, Jesus, right? Anybody else who thinks they're perfect, it's not true. Compare that to an unhealthy brain. You see people who are unhealthy, sad, troubled, inconsistent, unsuccessful. Number 6, certain brain systems are involved with certain behaviors. This is what's really cool as we see the study of the brain moving forward, is we can start to see that there's specific parts of your brain that are involved in specific things. Your prefrontal cortex, which we'll talk about a little bit, that's like executive function. That's like the boss in your life. It's like the CEO. It's like the part of your brain that's like, yeah, no, don't do that. Yeah, no, let's do this. That's a good idea. That's a terrible idea. Now, the parents in here are just like, so what's going on then? Well, unfortunately, like we'll talk about later, the prefrontal cortex, not that quite developed yet in teenagers and young children. When you think of the temporal lobes, we see things like learning and reading, parietal lobes, direction sense, cerebellum with motor skills. It's awesome. But this also means is that when you have problems in certain parts of the brain, they tend to cause specific kinds of problems too, which we'll go into a little bit more detail as well. Number 7 is this. Normal is not normal. Can I get an amen? All right. So how many of you have issues? Raise it. Own it. Let me clarify. How many of you in this room have struggled with attention, focus, sadness, anxiety, worry, flexibility, stubbornness, impulsivity? Raise it. See, right now, every single hand should be raised in this room. In fact, if you are sitting there right now, looking at the screen, and you're like, no, 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 I'm perfect. If that's you, you could be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. Meaning this, if you think you're perfect, you got issues. Everyone else readily accepts and acknowledges, like, we have issues. It's part of the human experience. We don't have the perfect brain. Doesn't mean we don't strive to be. We want to be like Jesus, but none of us are Jesus in here. But here's why we have to know that. We all have issues. We all have problems. Does that mean that we all need to go run out and say, like, I need help? Like, no. I have anxiety, but my anxiety is under control. It wasn't for a while. I went to this period last February. You remember last winter? Not this one. This winter was really mild. Last winter was awful. The sun did not come out for like 5 months. It was terrible. I started having anxiety attacks last February. And that... Prefrontal cortex, man. Prefrontal cortex. They're not fun. I was having heart palpitations at night. I wasn't sleeping well. So I went to my doctor. I'm like, I don't know what's going on here. Like, what is happening here? He's like, well, let's do blood work. And the blood work came back, and he's like, your vitamin D level, like the normal range is like 7.9. I had a 2.2. He's like, I have been practicing medicine for like 30 years, and I've never seen a vitamin D this low. And I was like, okay. Oops. And he's like, you're not from here, are you? And I was like, no. He's like, so where are you from originally? I'm like, San Diego. He's like, and what's your ethnicity? I'm like 3/4 Hispanic. He's like, yeah, so you're not made, like, ethnically and geographically. You weren't ready for this. You need to do, like, the light therapy. Like, I had to have for a month a light shining in my face in the morning, and I had to take vitamin D supplements. And it made my vitamin D, and my anxiety went away. That's really cool. But this is what's cool about that, because I say this to say, we all have issues, but the real question is this. If you have issues that are making you unable to be happy, if you're struggling with issues that are impeding your joy, that are stopping you from being successful, that are harming you in some way, then we got to get help. Somewhere along the line, we somehow decided as a culture, as a society, and even in faith communities and churches to say, well, if you're hurting, it's not really hurt. Or, you're not really sad. Like, you think you're sad, but why would you be sad? How about you pray? Now, I'm all about prayer, and I'll show you a brain scan of what prayer does. But I'll tell you what, there's a difference between a hurt brain and somebody who needs to pray. It's a fine, fine line, and I get it. It's a fine line. But what I want to articulate is this. 60 million people have brain struggles at any given time. You have God's most magical creation in your brain right now, which means it is ridiculously complex. It's not simple. Number 8 is this. This is really cool. You can change how your brain works and change how your life works. Your brain's crazy complicated. It can get hurt easily. If it doesn't work right, you don't work right. You might need to get help. But at the same time, it can heal. It can change. It can get better. And that to me is really awesome. It's awesome to see how God designed this thing to still try to be okay despite us, or in spite of what we do. So yeah, we all have struggles, but guess what? We also all have the power to do something about them. What that means is that we don't get to be a victim of circumstance. I'm a college professor. Do you know how many excuses I have heard for everything. A lot. It also means that we don't get to use struggles as a crutch. Every semester over at Corbin University, I get at least one student that comes up to me, and they come up to you with like a piece of paper, and they're like, hey, Dr. Payne, so here, like I have ADD, so you have to give me a week extra to do my assignments, and it's this list of accommodations that I have to do to help the student who has ADD. And so I look at the paper, and I'm like, okay, cool. You got ADD. Welcome to life. Where we all have something. I'm not diminishing it. But I want you to know that having issues is a part of living. We live in a hurt, broken, sinful world that causes a lot of trauma and insecurity and worry, sadness, you name it. But then I say, so okay, of course I'm going to do these accommodations for you. I'm going to do all this stuff. Absolutely. But I have a question for you. What are you doing about it? Almost every single time I ask that question, the answer is, well, like this, like this paper. I'm like, no. This is everything I'm doing for you. My question is, what are you doing about it? And they get stuck. See, I'm in the business of teaching teachers how to be teachers. Do you imagine, like, a teacher going to the principal and saying, like, hey, so principal, like, I know you told me report cards are due Friday, but I have ADD, so my doctor says you have to give me a week. You know what the principal would say? Yeah, no, sorry. Get it done or you're not going to come back next year. So why do we have this sharp distinction between high school and college and then the real world and the working world? So that's what I try to do is prepare my students. Say, if you're hurting, that's okay. But what are you doing? What are you doing about it? Because there's a lot of cool things out there to help an underactive prefrontal cortex, which is usually what you see with ADD. There's many things you can do with that. Are you doing it? I hope so. All right, now let's move to the second part of this. So I gave you 8 brain facts. Do you guys remember any of them? I'll give you like 3 minutes to talk to your neighbors over here and try to remind yourselves of what you just learned with these 8 facts. Not yet. Okay. So the straight classroom again. Hold on. Wait for direction. I'm like, again, elementary teacher. Sorry. You know what I use in my classroom is I say touchdown, and then every student has to drop it to their hands, give me the touchdown sign, and they can't talk. So much better than some of the things I hear. 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. I can't do it. You know what I hear? Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. And the class has to say, I'm loving it. Or teacher says, Red Robin, and the class has to say, yum. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. 3 minutes, you talk to your neighbor, and then when I call attention, then you've got to come back. Deal? Go for it. So the question I get a lot is actually like, how can I get a brain scan? Well, it's hard to do, and it's like really expensive. So what I suggest is like, don't get a brain scan. You don't need a brain scan. If you understand yourself really well and study about it, you can pretty much kind of predict what your scan would look like. Where I have seen brain scans be really helpful, though, are in like cases or situations where somebody was like really hurting and struggling, and like doctors or counselors or therapists were like, we don't know what to do. We have no idea. Like, we're trying this, we're trying that, it's not working. In those cases, I've seen brain scans be really helpful because it's like, oh, we can actually see what the brain's doing and then target treatment for that. All right, so it was a good conversation. Thank you for doing that. Yes? Why did the what? She was actually a part of our normal brain study that we did. So she got it for free. Yeah. No. You know what we found out in the normal brain study is that there's no normal people. Because everybody's hurt and everybody does things and it causes challenges. Okay, so the first part of what we talked about was just 8 simple brain facts. The second part of what we're going to talk about now is how the brain develops. The developing brain. So this is all applicable right to you guys right here, because your brains are developing. So it starts with this development fact number 1, which is this. See, the brain actually starts to prune like the second you're born. Like when you are not born yet, your brain is like incredibly smooth. And then you come into this world and your brain's like, okay, what am I going to use and what can I get rid of? Because when you're first born, you have too much gray matter. You have too many connections. Too much, like infinite possibilities. Like your brain's just like, oh, what is happening here? So it has to like prune itself. It starts to like, oh, okay. As time goes on, it's like, yeah, I'm not using this right here. Okay, yeah, I'm using this. It starts to focus on what it's being used on, and it starts to get rid of what it doesn't use. So that way it can be better at using what it is using. So when we think of music or language or even accents, we don't stop to think about how that's brain function at work. So who in here speaks fluently another language? What's the language? Russian. Okay. Who wants to stand up right now and just give me a sentence in full native-sounding Russian? Because I say that for a reason, accents. Like if I try to speak Russian right now, I guarantee you it would not sound Russian. Somebody want to? I mean, it can be simple. Just like tell me who you are, where you live, what grade you're in, and like what you like to do. Go ahead, go for it. You don't have to. Well, okay. I could not do that. I could not do that. Why? Why can't I do that? Why can he speak this way, but I can't? Because I'm old? Pero yo puedo hablar en español. Y yo puedo decir palabras que ustedes probablemente no pueden decir. ¿Y por qué? Now, I have a little bit of Spanish. Native Spanish speakers, like all my family, they hear me talking in Spanish and they're like, oh. Güerito, which is like little white boy. But this is what's so cool about the brain. This is what I love about research of the brain. When you're born, your brain is like, it's open to anything. It takes information and it prunes what it doesn't use to focus on what. Like, has anybody heard like African tribal languages where they have like the clicking? Their brain isn't born differently than ours. Like you were born with the same ability to click in your speech the way a person in a tribe in Africa can do it. Guess what though? You probably can't. You know why? Because your brain didn't use it. It didn't hear it. So it pruned it away. It's like, yeah, okay, that's gone. I'm going to focus on this. Can you guys roll your R's? Do you use that in Russian language? That's why you can do it. Guess what? In English, there's no rolling of the R's. My wife, who only spoke English growing up, she's half Lebanese, but didn't speak anything other than English. She didn't roll her R's. She didn't even hear the sounds of rolling of R's until probably she met me. And so I'm saying like, burrito, and she's like, I have a cousin named Arturo, and she's like, Arturo. Her R rolling is gone. The brain was like, yeah, I don't know what that is. They did a research study of men from China who've never really heard English ever. And they started talking to look at brain differences. But what they did is they looked at the difference they looked at the letter L. There's no letter L or an L sound in Chinese. That's why if you say hello to a Chinese person, what do they say? Hello. Now that's stereotyped and it's made fun of, but we don't stop to acknowledge it. They did a study where they actually sat with this adult male who's never been exposed to English, and they literally did this. Hello, hello. They did not hear a difference. They heard the exact same thing. Now you guys are like, no, There's an obvious difference between hello, haro. You know why you know the difference? Because your brain knows the letter L. Where is language processed? In your brain. So for that adult, hello, haro, their brain's like, we don't hear a difference because that brain pruning occurred and got rid of the L. Isn't that fascinating? But that helps to explain things like accents. So again, like both my mom and dad, they only spoke Spanish at home growing up. Then they had me and my sister, and they're like, no, we're in America, only English. So they didn't speak Spanish anymore. And then my grandma babysat me from 1 to 5 years old, and she couldn't speak English. But she couldn't even talk to me in Spanish because that was the rule of the house. No Spanish at home. So I heard broken English all the time. But guess what? Do you think I still heard a lot of Spanish? I did. Because she was watching her novelas all day today while babysitting me. Or on the phone gossiping to her sisters. So here's what's fascinating about that. My brain pathways of Spanish were preserved. So that's why yo puedo hablar en español poquito bueno. But then my first full experience in Spanish was high school, taking Spanish 1. And so we're learning, and then my friend next to me who's never heard or spoke Spanish are like, yo quiero ir a la biblioteca. And I'm like, ooh. It's not how you say it. It's not guacamole. It's guacamole. Why is it different? Because of brain exposure. Because my pathways. It's the same thing with music. Has anyone in here heard a person sing that thinks they sound good? And in your head, you're like, stop. We don't stop to consider how music is occurring and processed in your brain. They actually did research studies with older people, not me, older people who didn't have any musical background whatsoever, sat them at a piano and played middle C and D, and they could not hear a difference between the two notes. Isn't that fascinating? Again, because where is music processed? Inside your brain. So this is why you bring up this fact. Your brains are still developing, which means you should be exposing it to as many good things as you can. How many of you play an instrument in here? Awesome. If you don't know an instrument, learn one. There's a lot of, what we see in brain research is that if you know an instrument, it's actually correlated with higher IQ, ability to process better. How many of you play an instrument really well, really good? What age were you when you learned it? 5th grade, elementary school. Elementary school. 2nd grade? Yeah. So if you're 10 years old and you start learning piano, can you learn it pretty quick? Yes. Can you get really good? Yes. If you're 90 and you've never touched a piano, can you learn piano? You're not going to be Beethoven. But why? Because if you've never played an instrument and now your brain's past that, it's pruned it away, learning piano is harder because your brain's having to recreate brand new pathways. Whereas if you're younger and you're learning an instrument, that part of the brain's oh, okay, we still have that here. We can do this. So learn an instrument. If you don't know another language, which I don't think is the case, learn one. If you want to learn a third, do it. Learn a third language. It's amazing for the brain. Number 2 is this. Your brain develops from the back to the front. Now, your whole brain is always developing, especially when you're younger. When you're after 25, it's not like your brain stops changing. But what I'm talking about is the developmental foundation for your future. So it starts right here in the back. In the infants and in toddlers, your cerebellum is the most active part of the brain. And that makes total sense, because guess what your cerebellum is involved with? Moving. Coordination. That's why you see a 10 months old trying to walk. Oh, that's really cute. Their cerebellum is just like working overtime, trying to get that going. And then, after this is like developed, it starts to kind of hone in right here in your parietal lobes, which is around your elementary school years. And this is where you see a lot of reading and writing taking place. Totally makes sense. When do you teach reading and writing? Elementary school. And then you hit middle school, where it's like a black hole. It's all hormones. You ever stop to think, every single thing you learn in middle school, you relearn it in high school? Everything. You take history in middle school, and you retake it again in high school. You learn algebra, pre-algebra in middle school, you relearn it in high school. Do you know why? Because the middle school years are like this void of hormones and like kids trying to find out who they are and how they fit into the world. I'm seeing the middle schoolers, and some of them are like, yeah. And some are like, I know me. Now, where are my high schoolers in here? No, you're not out of the woods yet, because the teenage brain is all drama. Can I get an amen in here? Anyway. Parents? Yes? Oh, yes. Now, teenagers in here, especially like the oppositional ones that are trying to get angry with me right now, maybe not you, but can you think of teenagers in your world that are just really overly dramatic? Yeah. It's a fascinating concept. But you know why the teenage brain is all drama? Because the most active part of the teenage brain is the limbic system, the limbic part of the brain, which is involved in emotions, feelings, and bonding. Think about that. You have like a 30-year-old like, oh man, feeling kind of bummed out. And you have a 16-year-old like, I'm so bummed out. Why is it so different? Because the brain is so different between the two. This is why, though, depression and anxiety are the most reported brain struggles in teenagers. Because it's that limbic brain, overactive in a lot of them. This is fascinating. 83% of teenagers say their best memories in life involve their friends. You know who really does not like this statistic? Moms. Moms. Because they have this need of bonding with their kids. Again, it's larger limbic system in female brains mostly than males. But oftentimes, like mothers look at this and just like, why is this? And they'll say, I had one literally, we were having this discussion, and this teenager was just like, oh yeah, like my favorite memory is like when I was with Shasta, and like we went to this trip, and the mom's like, okay, hold on. First off, I birthed you. Second, our life savings has gone to you. And you meet this Shasta girl who you've known for like 6 months, and now she's the most important BFF in your world? No. And so I have moms tell me like, that's not fair. And the response is, well, no one said the brain is fair. But in the teenage brain, friends are overly important. They matter too much. Adults in here, how many times have you said to children, your friends don't matter that much? Your friends aren't going to get you into college. Your friends aren't going to get you a job. And then the teenage brain's like, you don't know. It's different. They're going to be my friend forever. But here's a scary side of that statistic. Nearly 50% of teenagers have contemplated suicide at some point. That's terrifying, but it also makes sense. Because if your brain in the teenage years is the most active in the emotional, dramatic centers, it doesn't know how to process emotions, and drama the same. Think about it from this perspective. I am 37 years old. 37. If I'm at work as a 37-year-old and someone starts to bully me as a 37-year-old, my response is probably going to be this. Really? How old are you? Think about that, right? Adults in here. If somebody was teasing you at work, the response of an adult is going to be like, what is wrong with you? But what happens in the teenage brain when they're bullied and teased? It inflames. The limbic part of the brain explodes, which is scary when you stop and consider it. So you've got this teenage brain that can't process it. And then adults are just like, stop, you're fine, you're making too much out of this, just get over it. But why is it that we have so many of our young people taking their own lives? We can't ignore it. We have to teach them about this. You guys, as teenagers in here, have to realize that your brain is oftentimes working against you. That the part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex that stops and goes, yeah, it's okay. That's the last part of the brain to fully develop. Now, moms, where are you? Raise your hand, mothers. Guess what? I'm so sorry. You make it worse. So they did a research study on this, and they paid teenagers to get QEEG brain mapping done, and then they criticized them to see what the brain does. You imagine, hey, well, if we give you $50, let's put some stuff on your head, and then we're going to criticize you. Yeah, many teenagers are like, yeah, $50, I'll sign up for that. So they did. And as they did it, when they got criticized, like certain parts of the limbic system would flare up just a little bit. And then they played the teenagers a recording of their own mothers criticizing them. And the limbic system goes, which makes sense, right? Sometimes it's like dad comes downstairs like, sweetie, you need to go change, that's not appropriate. Okay, Dad. And the mom comes down, sweetie, are you going to wear that? Shut up, Mom! Like stomping away, and the mom's like, what? How many times have we heard, like, Mom, like, why is it that someone else can say something to you, but if I say something to you, guess what? You know why? We don't know why it is, but the brain reacts differently to mom criticism. And some mom's like, oh, I knew that a long time ago. That's why I have other people do it for me. But here's the bottom line of all of that. For the teenage brain, emotions overpower logic. So adults oftentimes are expecting their kids to be logical. Guess what? That's setting yourself and them up for failure. Because the teenage brain is illogical. It's emotional. Here's what the live teenage brain looks like. You ready? Can anybody relate? Uh-huh. I see things like this on a daily basis in my classes. All right, number 4 is this, peer pressure. How many of you guys have been taught about peer pressure? Guess what? Peer pressure is kind of a lie. It exists, but it doesn't come from peers. Peer pressure comes from you. Now let me explain that a little bit. In the teenage brain, the basal ganglia part of the brain, which is involved in anxiety and needing to fit in and caring way too much what people think about you, is working hard. The limbic part of the brain is also working hard, where it desires and needs friendships and bonding and connections. Now let's take a look at drug programs. Has anybody been through DARE? Notice how you hear people say that? Yeah. I have never asked that question and somebody goes like, yeah! Dare! No, Dare, the most expensive anti-drug campaign in U.S. history. Also, the most ineffective anti-drug campaign in U.S. history. It didn't work. It doesn't work. Anybody do the Dare graduation? What did you get? Did you get your ribbon? Yeah. Yeah, you get your ribbon or you get a certificate. So I graduated Dare in 6th grade. My elementary school went K through 6. So it was 6th grade, I got my Dare ribbon, right? Tell me when in history, when you have a situation where somebody comes up to a kid like, hey, dude, you want to try this drug? And they go oh, yeah, my ribbon. No. Tell me when that happens. It doesn't. Did you know that the vast majority of teenagers that use drugs for the first time were not offered it? They asked for it. The vast majority of the time. So yeah, that's peer pressure. But it's not coming from other people. It's coming from you. I mean, think about how drug campaigns work or peer pressure. It's always the same thing. It's always this. Here, you have Johnny. And Johnny's a good kid. Johnny knows right from wrong. Johnny's a Christian. Johnny comes from a good family. And then you have Billy. And Billy uses the marijuana. And Billy comes up to Johnny and says, hey, Johnny, you should try the marijuana with me. And Johnny goes, no, Billy, that's bad. I'm not going to do that. And then Billy goes, come on, man. Everybody is doing it. Don't you want to be cool and hip like all of us? And then Johnny says, no, Billy, I really can't do that. And then Billy goes, come on, Johnny, if you don't do it, I'm going to beat you up right now. And then Johnny goes, oh, I don't want to get beat up. Okay, I'll just try it once. And then 6 months later, they're addicted to heroin. Is that not what we hear? Is that not what we're taught about how you have to be strong against the pressures of other people in order to resist bad things? Guess what? Most of all that pressure and thoughts about bad things start in your head first. It's usually the teenager that's like, oh, I need to be liked. I need to fit in. Now, they're not having this language. They're not even aware of it. But the brain needs connection. It needs to fit in. It has to be liked. It wants to be funny. It wants to be appreciated. It wants to have friends and be admired. And then it looks at a group of people who has that respect or who is wow, look at them. They're just doing these things. And their brain goes, oh, I want to be like them. And they go. So where's the actual enemy? It's usually your thoughts, your thought patterns. Satan. Yes. And yet we allow the intrusion in many of us to let us go in that direction. So peer acceptance, bonding, wanting to do things to be accepted. This is happening in your head without you even being told to do so. So they did a research study on 40-year-old males and 16-year-old males playing video games to see the differences. So what do you think the difference is between a 40-year-old male playing a video game and a 16-year-old male playing a video game? What do you think? There's no difference. It's the same thing. It looks the same. But in the middle of the research study, and this was done on purpose because that's why this research study was happening. In the middle of the research study, as the participant is playing this driving video game with the diodes mapping their brain, the research assistant would come in and would say, hey, how are you doing? Yeah, I'm okay, I'm doing all right. Cool. I'm just trying to check the connections, trying to make sure everything's good. Yep, everything looks good. Awesome. And they start walking out and they go, oh, hey, by the way, you know how you came with like your friends who were doing the research study? Well, they're in the waiting room still, but we flipped on the TV, so now they can see what you're doing. Anyways, just thought you'd like to know. See you later. And they left. Why did they do that? They wanted to see what happens in the brain when the subject, when the adult or the teenager thought that their friends could be watching. Is there a difference? In the 40-year-old male who's playing video games, and they're like, hey, your friends that came with you, they're watching you play. What do you think happens in the brain of the 40-year-old? Nothing. They're playing. Hey, your friends are watching. And they keep playing. What do you think happens in the brain of a 16-year-old? And all of a sudden, they are speeding, running red lights, killing pedestrians on the sidewalk in the video game, and driving like fools, when before they were driving perfectly. It was just the thought that their friends might be watching that turned them into complete fools driving in that game. There wasn't a person in there going, dude, hey, do this, haha, oh, that. Nothing. It was all in the head. So this is one of the most critical lessons that you can learn from today. When you have these thoughts of like trying to do things that are just not smart, recognize that's your brain working against you. Oftentimes the other person might be like, okay. Like I remember being in a car and then my friend got licensed, he was driving like a maniac, and I'm like holding on like, what? Stop. That's number 4. Number 5 is this, your prefrontal cortex. Oh, the prefrontal cortex. Go like this with your hand. Do a face palm. When do you do a face palm? When you do something really dumb, or when you see someone else do something that's just really a bad choice, right? Like you see somebody do something and you go like, oh, are you kidding me? You had no idea, but you're actually using a brain metaphor there. Because when you're doing this, you're holding the prefrontal cortex. And your prefrontal cortex is usually what stops you from doing really bad decisions. Because the prefrontal cortex is involved in planning, judgment, forethought, impulse control, organization, time management, procrastination, goal planning, and learning from mistakes. Parents, how nice would our lives be if we had children that had full access to their prefrontal cortex? You know how easy my job would be as a college professor if all my students had full access to their prefrontal cortex? But they don't. The prefrontal cortex is the last part of the brain to fully develop, which is in the mid-20s. So if right now you're just like, I'm so mature, I'm super organized, you may have learned coping mechanisms, and you might actually have like an overactive cingulate, which keeps you like overly focused, but you're still lacking in development. You don't have some special brain that like developed magically. Now, what does this mean? This means 2 things. One thing that this means is that sometimes teachers or parents might be expecting a little too much. They might be holding developmentally inappropriate expectations. So I've talked about this, and that's why I love teaching this group, because I was doing this at where was it? I think it was a school, and it was with high school students and their parents. And as I was saying this, I heard right here in the front row, one of them turned to the mom and was like, do you see this? You are holding me to an inappropriate standard. And like the mom looked at me like, just like how males and females with brain differences, there's always a however. So yes, parents need to be aware that the teenage brain is not fully developed. It's not okay to expect perfection out of the teenage brain. But adults have to be the prefrontal cortex for you. Which means that you as young people need to trust and listen to your parents. So that same situation, when there was like that pair right there in the front, like, see, Mom, you were holding me to inappropriate standards. I said this point, and she's like, I'm sorry, sweetie, but it turns out I have to be your prefrontal cortex for you. It's kind of true. It goes both ways. I want you to think about this, because sometimes we struggle with this. Like sometimes like the fantasy of the young person, of the teenager is like, I just wish that I just could do whatever I wanted. Well, let's talk about that. Can you guys think of a young, ridiculously famous and wealthy person who got like really famous at a young age? I'm already hearing it. Who do you think it is? Justin Bieber. So let's talk about the Biebs for just a little bit. The Biebs. Justin Bieber. Do you know what age he became ridiculously famous and wealthy? 13. YouTube. Then he got picked up. By the time he was 16 years old, do you think anybody had any real control over him? Mm-mm. Do you think his parents could tell him what to do? Mm-mm. This is why, like, has anybody seen him make ridiculously terrible decisions and mistakes? Yes. Like, you're using your own entourage and security detail to close down private roads in private neighborhoods to do illegal street racing. That's not smart. The fully functional prefrontal cortex steps in and is like, no, that's not a good choice. Now, do you think he had people in his security detail that were like, this is a really bad choice right now? Yeah. Why couldn't they go, hey, Justin, not a good choice? Why couldn't they say that to him? He pays them. He's their boss. He's like the classic example of the unsupervised prefrontal cortex. The brain of a young person with no supervision. No one to hold him accountable. It's embarrassing. And it's sad to see how many things that he was doing wrong. This is also why, a few years ago, he was driving through the streets of New York City with a security detail looking for a pool to get baptized in by a minister. Middle of the night, driving around, and finally ended up at one of the NBA players' homes with his minister to baptize him in a swimming pool. Now, the next day, people are like, what? And you know what his answer was? I feel like I need direction. See, to me, that's the unsupervised prefrontal cortex screaming and begging for supervision. Asking for someone to help him. So he turns to God. And then kind of fell off. And back and forth. But it's scary. Those of you who are young, under 25, and you're just like, I got this. No, you don't. Parents, be their prefrontal cortex for them. Your job is not to be their friends. Your job is to guide them, to raise them in the way they should go. I mean, it's scriptural. It's a reason for that. These young brains are like, right now it's getting like really, really odd right now. You're like, okay, stop, okay, yes, all right, we get it. All right, let's move on. How many of you like multitasking? Yeah? How do you multitask? What do you do? Watch Netflix and do homework. While texting somebody. and on social media and posting 14 selfies. And so guess what? Multitasking, it's actually not a good thing. In fact, multitasking is not even a thing. You cannot multitask. Your brain literally cannot do two things at once. Let me rephrase. Your brain cannot accomplish two tasks. Breathing and walking is not a task. You're not like, my task today is to breathe. Those are natural biological responses. But guess what? You cannot watch Netflix and do homework at the same time. You cannot be on social media and do your homework and be on the phone and watch Netflix and post a selfie at the same time. Someone said it just a little while ago, your brain's just bouncing back and forth. Your brain's literally like, I'm watching a movie. And then it's like, oh wait, I have a sentence here. And then you start writing the sentence. If you're typing a sentence out, you have stopped. Now some of you are really good at like bounce, 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 bounce. Great. You're really good at bouncing your brain, but then you're actually hurting it. Because the truth is that when you multitask, it's not more productive. It actually leads to more distractions. I don't know how many times you're like, all right, I'm going to open my laptop. I need to write an email. And then 8 minutes later, I'm like, how did I spend $40 on Amazon? How did that happen? Distractions. It's an inefficient use of time because you're bouncing, but your brain still takes a little time to adjust to the new. It actually results in a decrease in performance. If you actually just did what you need to do and moved on to what next you need to do, you would actually do all of it quicker, better, more efficiently, and better in performance and productivity. And people who multitask the most, the gray matter of their brain actually shrinks. It's not good. Now, there is one form of multitasking that you can actually do really well. Anybody know what it is? What's that? Talking and breathing. That's good. Listening to music. Music can be good. Not for everybody, but here's why. When you are doing a task, like engaging in task completion, your brain uses very specific parts to do a task. When you're doing another task, your brain's competing. It's like, I can't do two things at once because I'm using all these parts to do this task. Now I'm switching to do this task. When you listen to music, it actually activates different parts of your brain. It's not competing, it's actually using more of it. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody does well with it. Like, how many of you need complete silence in order to do work? Yeah, some people are like, I need complete silence. Really? Even though you just said you watched Netflix. Some people are like, oh, no, I have to have music. It helps me study better. And even then, it could be different music for everybody. Somebody's like, I have people say, I love classical music. And someone's like, you put classical music on, and then I can't study because I'm just irritated. Some people are like, I like actually listening to soundtrack music. Some people are like, I like listening to anything. Some people are like, I need my country. Got to listen to my country music as I study. Well, what? You guys got something against country music? Yeah, I can't listen to it either. It's the one genre I cannot handle. But this is what's really cool, is like, if you find that music can be helpful, go for it. If you don't, well, then don't do it. And what about social media? Guess what? It's not a lot of research yet because it takes a long time for research to come out that's good research, and social media hasn't been around that long. It takes about 20 years for solid research to come out. But research is finally coming out, and it's all terrible. Social media is terrible. Some of you already couldn't even sit through this without checking social media. All of a sudden I see like, oh. Did you know that people who use social media the most actually have smaller areas of the brain that process restraint and emotions? They tend to be more frenzied, more impulsive, less self-control, less emotional regulation, and they perform worse on cognitive control tasks. Here's the deal. Why does social media exist? Tell me why. Why does social media exist in the first place? Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter. Why does it exist? Why do these companies go into business? To connect people? No. Why else? To pass the time? No. What? Say it again. Money. They're a business. Not a single social media company started business to say, I have a dream of bringing good into the world. No, they look at like, there's a gap, we can connect people to each other, and we can make money off of it. So guess what that means? Social media is designed to be addictive. Because if you're on it more, they make more money. And yet all of us are just like, no, but I have friends. That's why it's created, to help you think that you're, and they capitalize straight off the dramatic teenage brain. Somehow, you've been fooled to think that your identity depends, and happiness and joy depend on how many likes or views you get on something. It doesn't matter. But that's how I communicate with friends. Yeah, but probably not good ones. But then I wouldn't know what happens. Well, you could, by calling them or visiting them. Here's the deal. Social media doesn't replace real relationships or real friendships. And instead, it just creates addictive patterns that are designed to be addictive to make more money. And if you have problems with social media, here's a test for you. Delete it. Don't sign in for a week. Don't do anything for a week. Some people immediately are just like, I can't do that? That's a big red flag, isn't it? That is scary. Number 7, creativity. The creative brain. Creativity is also related to the brain. But the most creative people can also have the most struggles, which is really interesting because bipolar disorder and depression, anxiety, alcoholism, and panic disorder, they're the most common in the most creative people. When we think of people like Robin Williams, people like regarded him as like a comedic genius. He had a really dark side, didn't he? When you think of like artists or poetry, there's some darkness there. People are like Edgar Allan Poe, and then you like, oh, what is happening? Van Gogh, and then you like read up and you're like, oh my. What's also interesting is that as creativity increases, prefrontal cortex activity decreases. Did I strike a nerve? You okay? Yeah. Because think about it. Your prefrontal cortex is a part of the brain that like steps in. It's like, no, don't do this. Yes, do this. No, don't do this. If you're being creative, then that part of your brain just like, go, just do. So they actually did a research study on freestyle rappers. And they found that as they started their freestyle rapping, the prefrontal cortex shut off. It makes sense, right? Because they're just going. Like me, my prefrontal cortex works great. It probably works a little too hard. So it's like, hey, go ahead and freestyle rap. I'm going to be like, I'm going to the store to buy some more. I recognized early in life that any aspirations in freestyle rapping would not work well with me. But here's why I'm mentioning this, because we look at creativity and we like either diminish it or we ignore it. Just know that it's creative because of how your brain is working. And if you want to foster healthy creativity, we can't over-inundate it with too much structure. So if you're that person that's like, okay, I wake up at 5 o'clock and I do this, and 6 o'clock I do this, and 7 o'clock I go to school, and then at 3 o'clock I have practice, and then 4 o'clock I have cello, and then 8 o'clock I have this and that, and you're like boom, 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 boom. If your day and your time and your life is so overly structured this way, it's actually bad. Like your brain in development needs time to be able to just like think and plan for itself and do things for itself. Number 8, what you do today impacts your tomorrow. Everything you do right now, as you sit and you listen, as you leave this evening, what you talk about, what you think about, what you focus on, what you eat, how you exercise, how you learn, how you study, how you connect. All of that impacts how your brain functions. All of it. Everything you do today, in this moment, has an effect on you, not only today, but tomorrow and the day after, and for the rest of your life. When you look at this list right here, you see brain robbers, things that you do that hurt the brain. Things like alcohol. It's not good for the brain. Somebody's like, I heard that a glass of wine a day is great for your heart. Great. But it's not good for your brain. It dehydrates the brain. Does not do well for the brain. Things like drugs. People are like, well, but it feels good. Great. Still hurting the brain. Things like environmental toxins. Things like too much caffeine. People are like, wait, whoa. How much is too much? It depends on the person. No name calling. It depends on the person. Depends on the brain. But typically more than 1 cup a day is not that good. People are like, well, but if I stop drinking, then I get massive headaches. Yeah, it's called withdrawal. Caffeine actually constricts blood flow to your brain. So if you're addicted to coffee and you stop using it, the headache you're having is because your brain's actually opening up. It's like, whoa! What's happening? The blood is flowing. Too much using the computer. Too much using your cell phone. Too much text messaging. Too much TV. Do you know that watching TV is almost one of the only no-brain activities that you can do? You use your brain more when you go to the bathroom than when you watch television. You use your brain more when you sleep than when you watch television. Some people are like, yeah, but I need TV to go to sleep every night. Yeah, you know why? Because you're shutting your brain down. When you watch TV, your brain just goes, Some people are like, well, I had this one woman go like, I disagree. I watch murder mysteries, and I feel they're stimulating to my brain. And my response is, no, they're not. Because everything's provided for you on TV. Everything's already there. It's not like it stops and goes, how would you solve this mystery? It doesn't. Some people are like, well, I watch documentaries where I learn something. And it's like, no. It's like, Watching TV is not good. In fact, research shows that for young children, for every hour of television they watch regularly on a daily basis, increases their chance of being diagnosed with ADD by 10%. For every hour, an additional 10%. So then the stubborn people like me are like, so 10 hours a day means 100%? Yes! If your kid's watching TV 10 hours a day, guess what? You're pretty much guaranteeing they're going to have ADD. Question? So it's a little different with an online lecture. That's trying to substitute for a face-to-face. So that there's not a lot of research to show either direction, but that's different than like television watching, where you're watching a program that's entertaining. It's harder for people to learn on video lectures because of all the prefrontal cortex issues and distractions. Good question. Too much video games. But look at this. Even the fear of failure can be harmful for the brain. Meaning that if you're fearing failure and then you just don't do things because you're just scared, it's not good for you. Head injuries. Obviously bad for the brain. Too much stress. Irrational fears. Negative thinking. Do you know that every thought you have changes how your brain works? Every thought you have changes how your brain and how your body feels and works. Like right now, if we spent 1 hour talking about every great, amazing, fluffy, happy thing that's ever happened in our lives, how would you feel? Happy. You'd be like singing Kumbaya. Like, that was great. Except like the stubborn or the depressed people are going to be filtered and biased. Like, but imagine if we spent an hour talking about every hurtful, bad thing that's ever happened to us. How would you feel after that? You'd be like, that was like seriously the worst lecture I've ever heard. What you think matters. What you allow yourself to stew on matters. What you have, we have thoughts all the time. But these negative ones, if we keep focusing on them, they do not do good things. Poor diet, poor mental exercise, poor sleep, poor water intake, smoking, staying in a routine. You have to challenge yourself, challenge your brain, keep learning, keep doing new things. All right, we should take a break? Break time? Yep, let's take a break, and for how long? 10, 15 minutes. All right, let's come back at 20. 5:20, and then I have a few more to finish up, and then I'll do questions. All right, so those of you who are here, congratulations. It's good prefrontal cortex function. Although it's still a little later than we thought, but I'm really, really happy you guys are here. So we're just going to get started because I've got got just about 30 minutes left. So I want to get just through examples of the brain images that I have. And then I'm going to open it up for questions and see what questions you have about God's coolest creation. Sound good? Maybe I'll take a couple questions now while we wait for a couple people. Does anyone have questions? These burning questions that they've been wanting? Yep. Yes. Caffeine constricts blood flow to the brain, but can also help people focus and concentrate, especially those with ADHD or underactive prefrontal cortices. So it's this weird backwards mechanism of blood constriction, yet allowing for focus for some. It's still toxic in large quantities and over long periods of time. Sugar is awful. It is terrible for the brain. Actually, sugar is 8 times more addictive to the human brain than cocaine is. They did a research study of rats, and they got them addicted to cocaine and to sugar, and then gave them the choice. And guess what they went to every single time? Sugar. It is nothing good for the brain. There's no benefits of it in any way. It's just addictive. Say that again. Prefrontal cortex. It's true. Caffeine doesn't have sugar in it if you're adding sugar into the caffeine. So it's I'm having an ice mocha. Then it's double whammy. It's kind of like an adverse effect, even more so. But if you have just a cup, an 8-ounce cup of just black coffee, it's got some benefits in it. And there's not been a lot of research saying that that's terrible. Second, you put sugar in the coffee though, then you've destroyed any health benefits. Tea, way better for you. Green tea, black tea. It doesn't really have much, but it tastes great. I just had passion tea right now. So. Does that answer? Okay. It's really hard to see. You can imagine this light is this bright, but... Other question? Yep. If you have daily tea. Routine. Yeah, what that means is if you're still, if you just do the same exact thing every single day, It's not good for your brain. Your brain needs to be challenged. It needs to learn new things. It needs to keep growing and developing. So it's like you don't, if you're like, oh, I have a routine every day, I do this, I do this, I do this. You want to shy away from that as much as possible. It's great to have a routine, especially if you have like ADD and you need a routine to keep you concentrated. That's good, but if you don't like step outside of that because you have to stay in your routine, it's not good for you. Yep. Yes. Completely false. Like, I could not take out 90% of your brain and you function. You would not function, you'd be dead. So you use all of your brain, just some people use it better than others. Good question. I saw a hand over here. No? Did it go away? Okay. Uh-huh. Yep. Yeah. So in middle school, they're not going to be thinking of college. It's not going to happen. And some might really be, but again, there's this difference. A lot of times we get students in middle school, I mean any grade, but you have a student that's like really on top of things, and they're like really focused and they're fixated. That's not like a fully developed prefrontal cortex. What you often see is too much activity in the cingulate part of the brain, so they're like obsessive. And so they're working too hard, and then it's like all that pressure and like all the, like they have to do it, they have to do it, they have to do it. So all that to say, like I'd say the average middle schooler saying you need to make good choices for college, it's not going to go anywhere with them. Even saying like you have to do this because, like the consequential part of it is kind of rough with the middle school age. I think the best strategy for a middle school teacher is I need to do what I can do to nourish good prefrontal cortex development, to keep the limbic system in check, but also understand that everything you teach them, they're going to relearn again in high school anyway. So like, it's not necessarily like super academically important for middle schoolers. The hormones are just really in high octane, and so it's really important for, I think, the teachers. I mean, you look at the best teachers in middle school, and they're often like relational, and they're often like connecting with the kids in great ways, and through that, they get them excited about school. They get them motivated to it because it's connecting with them. Does that make sense? Yep. Yes? I've heard that before. Just kidding.
When or at what age can you lay a spiritual responsibility on an individual?
Oof.
What would be a good starting point to kind of direct them and say, okay, this is kind of what you're going to be doing?
Yeah.
I guess it's a spiritual growth path.
That's a really loaded question. Few thoughts about that. So, a person directing a spiritual responsibility is a fascinating concept. It's great if you're directing them into the spiritual calling that they themselves are going into, or that might be their calling. A lot of times adults have a hard time. Oh, thank you. I see your faces. A lot of times adults have an idea of what their kids should be doing and get upset when the kids don't do what they want them to do. And that can create a lot of tension. I'll give you a really good example of that. I teach at a Christian university. I teach in teacher education. There's been a lot of people who say, like, God's called me to be a teacher. And they can't teach. And it's awkward. And there's very specific, this one example of this girl's like, my parents are both teachers. I've wanted to be a teacher, and I have prayed about this, and the Lord has told me time and time again, I shall be a teacher. And it was the worst teaching I have ever seen in any student teacher. Like, it was bad. And there was no control in the classroom. She was giving a quiz with a document, and the answers to the quiz was on the screen. And the kids were like, Miss So-and-so, like, the answers are there. And she's just like, yeah, no, it's okay. And she kept going. And then the students were like, they gave up. And then they were giving the answers before she asked questions. And she was like, wow, you guys knew the answer before I even asked. You guys are so smart. And I'm in the back going, oh. And the classroom teacher's like, it was bad. So I say that because it's not making fun of her, but like, the level of her inability to teach was staggering. How do I deal with that? Like, I am sitting across from you, and you're telling me that the Lord Almighty told you you were going to be a teacher, and you can't teach. And so I prayed about this for a while, because I was struggling with this. And it kind of dawned on me, a lot of times where we feel like our spiritual calling is, it's actually not where we want to be, or where we're actually qualified to be, or like, I was great as an elementary school teacher. I didn't want to be an elementary school teacher. When I was 18 and 19 years old, I was studying film design. I switched majors 9 times in college. 9 times. I was trying to struggle. I didn't want to be a teacher because in my culture and in my family, teaching, like, that's not a respectable career. And second, elementary school teachers are all female. So you can't be a male and be an elementary teacher. When I finally, truly, realized that was my gifting, that was my calling, that was pretty amazing. So I'm going in all these, different roundabouts ways. What I finally ended up telling that student at the age of 23 years old, when she adamantly again said, you will not stop me being a teacher, nobody will. God told me I'm going to be a teacher. And so I finally looked at her, I said, sometimes we confuse God's calling for our lives with our selfish desires. And you need to pray through that. Because from my position, if God literally was calling you to be a teacher, you would be able to teach. And you can't. That's how hard I had to be with it. I really brought out the pain in Dr. Payne in that moment. And she cried, and she was angry with me. And she didn't pass the program. She still graduated, but she didn't get licensed. And then she got a sub job. She got a job doing small groups, intervention groups. And she was adamant, I'm going to do this for a few years, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to get my license again. I got contacted by her a couple years later, and she said, thank you. Because you were right. I had all these people telling me I was supposed to be a teacher, and I believed it. And I struggled. And then when I do these small groups and intervention, that's my calling. That's cool. So I say that to say I'm all about guiding our youth and guiding young people to find their spiritual calling and path in life, as long as we as the adults aren't interjecting our desires into it. As long as we're not trying to pave this path for them and let them do them. It's hard. I think of myself as a parent, right? I have an 8-year-old son. From when he was 4 or 5, I was like, where are your gifts? Where are your talents right now? And I've seen them grow and evolve. I'm a university professor. In my head, it's my kid's gonna go to university and get a degree and blah, blah, blah. My son, for the longest time, was I wanna be a trash man. And I was the doctorate degree in me, the professor in me was just you will not be a trash man. And I was tell me why. Because it's the coolest job ever. I was Eli, you do you. Let's practice. Take out the trash. Oh, that changed really quickly. So, what age? It's dependent. It's dependent on every kid. But I, as a parent, or even me as an educator now, as I'm like leading these 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds through this next phase of life, my job is to help them hone in on where they're going. Sometimes it's through tough conversations. There's some people that graduate from Corbin University and they still have no idea what they want to do in life. And I can pray. I try to force knowledge and logic, and then I remembered, wait, logic is a construct that comes over time. So I wouldn't say there's no right age. As a parent, you're just honing in from day one. Like my son right now is the most creative, like, storyteller. He's got this creative brain, and he also gets really obsessive. And so I know I've got to limit certain things. Like he gets no screen time because he gets obsessed with it. But then I give him like the tools necessary to hone in on his creativity. Does that make sense? Does that help? A little bit? Okay. Does that help? Okay. No, we have a TV, but it doesn't get turned on like Monday through Friday. Saturday and Sunday, he can watch like a movie. But it's because I know my son. He's obsessive. He's got a hot singlet like his dad. So he can get really obsessive. So for him, if he plays on the iPad, it isn't like, oh, I'm going to play on the iPad, it's done. It's like, iPad. And I'm like, yeah, we're done. We're going to remove that. And he's also anxious, so he gets anxious in watching TV. And when he gets anxious, he starts to have tics, which is like muscle movements. And I'm training all this stuff. So people are like, oh, he's fine. I'm like, no, like that's a motor tic. Like he's like doing this with his neck a lot. That's anxiety being manifested outward. So I know my kid. So yeah, we don't watch TV Monday through Friday. What's my routine? We have a very good routine in the morning. Like we all get up. My son has chores to do. I have a daughter as well. She's 7 years old, but she has significant special needs. When she was 5 months old, so we moved to Salem when my daughter was 5 months old, and the third day we were here, she started having seizures. And she had this form of seizures called infantile spasms, where it's not like typical seizures, but it's actually destructive seizures. It's actually destroying the brain. And so when she was 10 months old, we were told she would never walk or talk ever. And she'd pretty much be in a vegetative state her entire life, which she could live to be 100, but she would never walk or talk. So that threw our entire family into complete chaos. Do we have a routine? It's a routine of chaos. She's in physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, HIPAA therapy, EBA therapy, sensory therapy. Like, she's got people coming in and out of the house. She's in a special needs classroom now. But our routine, it's as structured as it can be, but it's also really tough. Yeah. Now, she's 7 years old, she's walking, even though she wasn't supposed to. But it's because of two things, because we have an almighty, powerful God, but we also weren't going to stop. So it's like, yeah, she's never going to walk. Okay, we're going to put her in physical therapy. And she's going to go 3 times a week for 5 years. And we were told from even the physical therapist, like, yeah, no, like she's not. Okay, keep going. And then it got better, and then it got better. And then it was, yeah, she might actually like be able to like move a little bit this way. And then a month later, it was like, wow, she's really progressing. Like now, we think she might actually be able to walk with a walker, like this little walker, like be able to walk assisted. And then a few months later, it was like, she might actually be able to walk with like leg braces and assisted devices. And then a couple months later, it was like, she might actually just need shoe inserts. 3 days later, she just walked on her own. Praise God. So it's pretty cool. But routine, yeah. So we're all about like no TV. And people are like, no TV at all? I'm like, okay, I'm also human. If we're taking a road trip, yeah, I'm bringing the iPad. They're going to watch the TV. Because there's a difference between hurting your brain for 2 hours during a long drive or me killing my children. So I am also a human being. It's like, for my sanity, watch a movie. All right, let's do the brain images and brain scans that I want to show you, and then I maybe have time for a couple more questions. So I just want to show you real quick. This example, again, is of the normal, healthy brain. This is like an example of a really healthy brain. Look at that compared to this picture right here. What do you see there? Their brain's terribly hurt. This is a 19-year-old that fell off a ladder and landed on his head. Actually killed a part of his prefrontal cortex. Look at these two brain scans right here. This is what cocaine does. This is what meth does. It can be different for everybody. That's what's really fascinating about drugs. Like, you can have 10 people, like, you've seen this in the media, you've seen this in the news, like one person used ecstasy one time and died. One time. And then someone, like I have a cousin, who uses it often and seems fairly functional. Now, I have 91 first cousins. Yes. It just kept going. Yeah, and they're all in San Diego, and it's a big family. So yeah, I've got a lot of variety in family members. But can this brain change? Yeah. Like, this brain is hurting a lot. But if this person, let's say the person on the left with cocaine, if this person stopped using drugs and did really good things for the brain would absolutely get better. Would it get back to where it was? No, probably not. But your brain does heal. Look what heroin does to the brain. And yet the treatment for heroin is called methadone, which is actually just as bad for the brain. Look on the right. Look, that's Oxy. That's a legal prescription drug. It's a painkiller. Have you guys heard like opiates? We have this huge problem in society with opioids and opiates. Why? Because they destroy brain function. I mean, think about this. I actually, this month, so February 3rd, I had an 8-hour-long lecture on the brain at Corbin University. There was like 350 people there, good time. The last half hour of that 8 hours, I was like, oh, my back started just like tingling in pain. And it was like, I have a bad back. I've had a bad back since I threw it out when I was like 18 years old working one day. And I'm like, okay, this is not going to be good. That night, it was really in a lot of pain. It got a little bit better, and then I made the really bad mistake of like carrying these like pavers to the backyard. Done. So by February 5th, I am out. I am hurting. I can't sit. I can't stand. I can't lay down. I can't walk. I'm in a lot of pain. I had to have an x-ray done, and then they put me on Vicodin, so a painkiller, a muscle relaxer, and a like tendon relaxer. All these things. So I was horribly drugged up for like 5 days. Like, I don't remember much of that weekend. I think I watched 2 full seasons of The Golden Girls on Hulu. That's how badly I was like out of it, right? By the middle of the next week, I'm like done. I'm like, okay, I'm feeling a little bit better, but I'm feeling like foggy. I'm feeling spacey. I don't like this. And we have to stop and think, like, what does OxyContin do? What does Vicodin do? So let's say, so here I am. I've got this back injury, right? I have a bulging disc, and I sprained my back. And now I took Vicodin. What happens? The Vicodin doesn't go travel into my back and go like, oh, like heal my back. How does Vicodin work? It goes into your brain and it numbs out your pain receptors, so you're like, oh, in a different way. But that's important to note because it's hurting and attacking the brain. That's how it works. So 5 days on this medicine, and I'm like, I was feeling a little better. I stopped taking it because I'm like, I'm not taking this for more than 5 days. By day 6, I had to have a phone meeting, and I'm struggling. Like, I'm actually like struggling to articulate my words. So I'm having my doctor's appointment to do a follow-up. He's like, how are you doing? I'm like, I don't feel right. Like, I feel spacey, I feel foggy. Like, I'm having a hard time articulating my thoughts and like carrying in like full conversations. He's like, well, you were on Vicodin for like a week. He's like, you just dropped your IQ by 15 points. I was like, yeah, I'm done. No more. And it's not been until just this last week where I'm finally feeling better again, and I'm actually able to like teach and have good conversations. That's how dangerous this stuff is. Now, if you have hurt your knee or you have surgery, I'm not saying like just tough it out, but recognize that it's addicting and it's hurting your brain. So the point is, get off of it as soon as humanly possible so you stop hurting your brain. Now, what's another drug that you hear a lot about that's very controversial? The marijuana. Does marijuana hurt the brain? The answer to that question is yes. Yes. Does marijuana hurt the brain? Yes. If you don't believe it, you are lying to yourself. And guess what? Facebook is not a research organization. You know how many times I've heard people go, well, I saw a video on Facebook. Like, great. You saw a video that someone made proving their point. That's called anecdotal evidence. That's not research. Every single credible research study, notice I say credible, every single credible research study ever produced on the study of marijuana shows 100% of the time that it hurts the brain. Every time, every credible study, every time. Does marijuana hurt the brain? Yes. Some people are like, well, but it's legal. Okay. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's not hurting you. Oxy, we just saw that. Well, but it feels good. Great. Just because it feels good doesn't mean that it's not hurting you at the same time. So I've had people do exactly what you did. That's why I kind of chuckled. So I've done this whole presentation in high schools, at an assembly. I did one at North Salem High School a few years ago. And I talked about marijuana. And so then after the presentation, this guy comes up, he's like, hey, so I have a friend. And I'm like, okay, a friend, I'll go on. Yeah, and so, whenever when my friend uses pot, he actually gets smarter. Or he actually feels better. And see, what I say to that is, it's probably true, but let me explain. What does pot do? Settles down your brain. So let's say your brain is working too hard. My brain works too hard. My cingulate, stubborn part of the brain, and my basal ganglia, my anxiety part of the brain, it's overactive. How do I know? Because I got brain scan after dating a girl for 6 months. But my brain works too hard. So if I used pot, I'd probably feel really good because it would settle down my overactive brain. But it would also be hurting me at the same time. So what I tell people is this: if you or somebody you know is using pot and they say it makes them feel good, they're self-medicating. They're doing something to try to make themselves feel better, but unfortunately, they're also hurting themselves at the same time. And there's way better things you can do to settle your brain down without hurting it at the same time. Somewhere in history, we decided marijuana wasn't bad for you. And it's probably because at first it was legal in medical cases. Do you know why marijuana was first legal in medical cases? It was for terminally ill patients, meaning you're going to die within a year. So do you think doctors really care about your overall brain health if you're supposed to pass away within a year? No. But somehow we've transformed that to be like, oh, see, well, it doesn't harm the brain. False. Question. Yep, heard that before. So, as a medical professional, you have to have the idea to say, what does less harm? If a person is suffering uncontrollable seizures, and THC, the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana, actually stops the seizures, yeah, that would probably make a lot of sense if this person can't function or do anything. But that works for that person. So unless you're having uncontrollable seizures that are not letting you live, that doesn't generalize to you. Does that make sense? So in certain cases like that, it might make some sense to know that, yeah, you're doing harm, but at the same time, what's the alternative? And that should be even a last resort, because are there other things? My daughter, at one point with her seizures, she was having up to 168 seizures a day. And I put her on pot. But we put her on an anti-seizure medicine and then put her on the ketogenic diet. And the ketogenic diet is a special diet where it's literally just all fat and protein and zero carbs. For some reason, it changes the way the brain works, completely stopped her seizures. She's been seizure-free for 4 years now. She's still on the ketogenic diet. So making her breakfast, literally her breakfast is like, I warm up peanut butter and butter, and I put the medicine in it to feed it to her. And then she has like bacon and eggs, and she has no carbs. But if that keeps her seizure-free, yeah, it's part of our chaos routine. All right. And she's okay. Yeah. The sugar is way worse for you than the fat. Your brain is like 80% fat. If you go fat-free, that's really bad for you. You should go sugar-free. Other questions? Yeah. Mm-mm. Well, we have to have a medical reason to do a brain scan. So if you're doing radiation therapy, adding more radiation to do the brain scan is not advisable. And then usually they're not in treatment for mental struggles. At the same time, it would be too convoluted. Yeah. I think I'll get there. Let me see. I think I have that scan. This is environmental toxins. If you look at this brain scan, it looks like a drug brain, except this person never did drugs in his life, 21 years old. But it looks like a drug brain. But you know why? He's a painter. So he was doing drugs in the form of inhalants. And we asked him, like, well, do you open windows? Do you, like, no. I mean, you smell the fumes? Yeah, I get headaches all the time. You're doing drugs. How about alcohol? It's not good for the brain. What about oxygen deprivation? This is a teenager who was playing the choking game. Literally choking each other until they passed out. You know why you don't see 40-year-olds playing this game? Because they have brains that work fully developed. Kind of like the whole Tide Pod. What? That right there is the prime example of an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex. Dude, I'm gonna try this. Any fully developed brain is gonna look at that and be like, no. The last time I checked, I'm not seeing 50-year-olds. All right, what about diet? What you eat matters. So if you look at this brain scan compared to this one, that's the same person, 1 day apart. The only difference is what he ate an hour before his brain scan. On the left, he had like a salmon salad with water. On the right, he had a triple cheeseburger, fries, and a milkshake. So, if you eat terrible food, how do you feel? Terrible. If you eat insanely healthy food, how do you feel? Hungry. I mean, truth is, food affects you. Now, some are like, okay, so that's temporary then. Well, yeah, that was done in the extreme on purpose. Food has a temporary effect on your brain. But if that's your diet all the time, that is your brain. All the time. Now look at this right here. Grateful versus hateful. So this is the inside of the brain now. This isn't the outside surface, but where you see the yellow like webbed activity, that's normal. Where you see these white areas, that part of the brain is working too hard, or the top areas of the working brain. Now, in this back part of the brain, your cerebellum, that should be white. Like if your whole brain was just nothing, that is not good. We like check your pulse, like, are you breathing? You want to see this right here. So this is the same person, one day apart. But what they did is during the scan, they were told to focus specifically on either happy thoughts or negative thoughts. When this person was thinking happy thoughts, the cerebellum's working great. Now, this person has a little bit of overactivity in the limbic and in the anxiety centers. But look what happens when he was thinking on hateful thoughts. The cerebellum drops out. And the depression and anxiety centers get much larger. Which just begs the question, like, why do we allow ourselves to keep thinking and stewing on negative thoughts? How many of you have a negative thought? We all do. Now, and the whole other thing that I teach about, it's called ANTS. It's called automatic negative thoughts. And I go through this whole process of teaching, like, thoughts come into your head automatically. Like, how many times have you had, like, a great day, and then all of a sudden you have one thought that comes in and wrecks your day? That's the power of thoughts that you have. But they also affect how your brain works. So when you have a negative thought, fight it. Challenge it. Because it will affect you. Now look at this. Look what prayer does to the brain. Similar to meditation, prayer works better. But look right here what you see here. Right here you see anxiety and depression. The cerebellum's not working that great. While praying, the anxiety and depression drops out and the cerebellum gets healthy in activity. Do you feel better when you pray? Yes. And biologically, that's what's happening. So do it. It's good. So what does this all mean? The PTSD scan, I'm sorry, was not in this one. But I can tell you what a PTSD scan looks like. In this brain right here, let's go right here, you would see overactivity in the limbic center, in the anxiety centers, and in the cingulate. We call it a diamond. So it's a PTSD diamond. Overactivity. When you have trauma, your brain changes and can rewire itself in a traumatic way. So you become anxious, you become depressed, and then your cingulate gets activated so you get obsessed and you get stuck on those thoughts. So you relive the memories and you feel all the anxiety and the depression and it all works hand in hand against you. One of the coolest things that you can do for PTSD is therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy or EMDR therapy. You can actually retrain the brain to let go of the hurt. Yes? Yeah, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or kids who've undergone a lot of trauma, yeah, or traumatic experiences. Like I've had to do counseling. Like when your first memory in life is being kidnapped, you know? Other things that I didn't really mention is like, that happened to me when I was 4. I was sexually abused by an older female cousin from 5, 6, and 7 years old. My mom was physically abusive with me. And my dad actually took his own life when I was 23 years old. I recognized really early, okay, I have an anxious brain. And there's a reason why I have an anxious brain. I've kind of been through some stuff. And so knowing that about myself, it's like, okay, I've been through a lot, and I'm hurting. I'm going to reach out because I'm not going to do this by myself. Well, I prayed and I prayed, and I never left that. But in my prayer, it was like, why am I trying to do this alone and just in my prayer? Why am I not seeking professional guidance? And so I went through EMDR therapy, and I went through counseling to help get my brain to settle down and work better. But yeah, I have anxiety disorder. Now, it's interesting is some people would be like, but are you anxious? Should you be anxious? I'll give you a side story of that. I went to Indonesia. We were doing a missions trip in schools in Jakarta. So I'm at Jakarta International Airport in Indonesia. We're on a budget Indonesia airline. A budget airline, where a week before, the nose gear fell off one of their planes and it caught fire. It is 3 hours delayed in a lightning storm. And I'm at the window looking at the pilot and a mechanic staring at the engine of our aircraft, and they're like this. I'm done. I am like peak anxiety. I'm like pacing. I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is it. Like I'm like writing my will on a napkin. I can't even do it, but I'm trying to like rebaptize myself, like just in case. Like, Lord, be with me. One of my colleagues from the university comes up to me. He's like, what's your deal? And I looked at him, I was like, so I've got anxiety. I'm managing through it. Just give me some space. He's just like, well, I've been seeing you so anxious, and I'm just curious why. I was like, again, like I'm just an anxious person. Just let me be. I'm good. I'm getting through this. And he goes, I guess that's why I'm so disappointed in you. And I was like, what? And he's just like, I guess I'm disappointed that you don't believe in God's providence enough to know that we're going to be okay. And I looked at him, I was like, oh. So not only do I have anxiety disorder, but apparently if we die, I'm going to burn in hell because I'm not Christian enough to know that we're going to be okay. He's just like, no, it's okay. I'm like, no. Like, think of what you just said. I have anxiety disorder, but I have it for a reason. I have it because of a lot of sin that was done in my life, a lot of it to me, without me even realizing or knowing it. My brain hurt. I struggled because of this. Don't diminish my anxiety as being a weakness of faith. Because I am strong, and I've worked hard. So if I'm going to pace and have bad thoughts and try to rebaptize myself, leave me alone. I'm going to be fine. I just need space. And he was like, okay, all right. But I say that for that reason. This idea, like, don't diminish this. This stuff is real. Hurts and struggles are real. They exist. Mental health disorders, brain struggles, they don't skip over certain races or ethnicities or socioeconomic status. Brain struggles and mental health don't go like, oh, you're wealthy. Okay, we don't touch you. They don't skip over Christians like, oh, we're people. We're flawed. We sin. We're a victim of sin. And somewhere we have to say, if we're hurting, we need to reach out. Because the last thing that we want to do is keep the hurt inside. Reach out to a trusted adult. Not to your friends. Your friends are not counselors. They're just going to tell you what you want to hear. Reach out to someone else. Right now, people are like, yeah. Your friends are not trained professionals. But get help if you need it. So what does this all mean? Well, it means that your brain matters. I told you 3 hours ago, my hope for you is that when you leave here, you just think a little bit differently about God's most amazing creation. Not that you're going to go out here and go crazy with this, but to respect your brain a little more, to think about it a little bit more. When you see someone do something really dumb, I want you to do your facepalm, but add 2 words. Prefrontal cortex. Try it. Go like this. Oh, prefrontal cortex. So I'll give you like a side story for that. I wrote a whole brain science curriculum on this that's in high schools. And a school district in Huntsville, Alabama. That's why I learned how to talk like this, because I visited Huntsville, Alabama. They actually adopted the entire program. Every single freshman in their high schools and across the entire city had to take my course in brain science. It was awesome. And I got to go visit. And so I go into the school, and as I'm walking with the superintendent and with the principal to the classroom, there's these 2 freshman boys at a locker, and one of them does something. The other person's like, dude, prefrontal cortex, man. And the kid's like, I know, stop. I was like, yes, that's amazing. Think about your brain. This also means that you need to understand how your brain works. Get to know it. Figure out what works well for you and what doesn't work well for you. Remember that your teachers' brains matter. How many of you have had, not that great teachers? You better not be homeschooled, because that would be really... The moms are like, really? Your friends' brains matter. Have you heard the expression, watch who you hang around? You are who you hang around with. It's true. Be careful. If you're with toxic, negative people, you become toxic. You become negative. If you hang around with people who are good people, it rubs off on you. Try to hang out with somebody that's smarter than you. That's really helpful. Not someone that's smarter than you and knows they're smarter than you and then diminishes you. You don't want that. But you are affected by those that you're with, your friends. And also understand how other people's brains matters. One thing that really hurts me is when I see people stereotyping or making fun of brain struggles or mental health. I have a daughter with significant special needs. When I hear the word retarded, I can't tell you what that does now to me. Because hearing that word and seeing that used in horrific ways, I used that word a lot when I was in high school. And now I have a daughter that qualifies with severe developmental delays. Don't diminish and make fun of that word or other words. Oh, dude, you're so OCD. No, probably not. You don't know what OCD is unless you're living through it. Being super neat and organized does not qualify as OCD. Now, if you have to be neat and organized because terrible things might happen, that's more along the lines of OCD. Don't diminish it. Don't make fun of it. It's hurtful. It also means that you have to have some empathy, some patience, some understanding with yourself and with other people. It also means that you can learn valuable skills to help you understand how your brain works and how it relates to your success. If you're struggling, get help. If you're struggling and you're blaming everyone else around you, that's on you. Know how you're hurting the brain. You saw that list of the brain robbers. Try not to do those as much as you can. Try to take care of the brain that God gave you. It's the most magnificent organ. Honor it. When you honor your brain like that, you're honoring Him. And this cool, magnificent design that can't be explained by science. And to me, people are like, oh, well, you're talking so scientifically. Doesn't that contrast your faith? No. All I need for me to prove God's existence is to think about the human brain. Because it's that amazing. And you get one. You have one brain in this one life. How you treat it, how you protect it, how you develop it, how you nourish it. It doesn't matter where you've been and what you've done. You're here right now. The choices you make from this point can continue to hurt it or can help it. That's on you. It's a big choice to make. My middle school people, it's okay. We'll learn it again in high school. But know that as we move forward. This right here is the nonprofit organization that I started called Brain Changers. Our goal is to give resources and training and curriculum. So I encourage you, if you want to go to this website, there's a newsletter to sign up for it. And then we have materials or resources that come out, or events or teaching dates that come out. So if you want to come and learn more, if you want to give this to other people who might want to learn about it, I encourage you to do that. Down here at this front table is this cool little bumper sticker. It says, I am a brain changer. This is our logo for Brain Changers, and it says www.brainchangers.org. I don't think I have enough for everybody, so please don't fight to the death and hurt your brains because of this, but if we run out, I'll find a way to give you some more. But like, if you want this, like, take it. Be cool to put it either a car window or something, just to help us in this message. Because you can see, like, I live this message. I love teaching about this, and my hope is that you learned a little bit about it today as well. So let's close out in prayer. Lord, thank you for today. And God, I thank you for our brain. I thank you for just the wonder that we have, just the awe that we can all be in when we stop and consider this 3-pound supercomputer and all that it does. Lord, to me and to hopefully everyone in here, we can see our human brain as just the evidence that we all seek and love to see of your creation and of your glory. Lord, I pray for everyone in here as well. Pray for the parents, for everybody involved in working with children, and for all the children, teenagers, young adults in here as well, Lord. Pray that they learn something from this message, that they carry this in their heart, or actually, I guess, in their brain, and to help them understand that honoring our brain is a great service to you, to the missions in our lives, and to our goals moving forward, Lord. Pray that we protect it. Pray for those of us in here that are hurting from it, or that are hurting or going through some struggle, Lord, that you empower them enough to realize that doing this alone is not necessary, and it actually can be pretty scary, Lord. So I pray for them to have the courage to work with others and to talk with others about the help that they might need, Lord. I pray for the rest of the time here, and that everyone leaves here safely, and that we can all get together soon. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank you all.